thanks for waiting for those who are waiting. But thank you for joining us today for the Arches community call on the latest Arches release, Arches 7.6 LTS, which we'll go into what that means in a little bit. So my name is Annabel Enriquez, and I'm an Arches project team member at the Getty Conservation Institute. And this is an informal call, and it really is an opportunity for you all to learn about the latest Arches release. And that became available at the end of September 30th. Next slide. Today, you'll first hear from our main presenter, Kansa, and then we'll have a discussion, and everyone is invited to join in that discussion. It will be moderated by Arches project team member Kevin Kochanski, and we'll also include Farallon Geographics developer Cyrus Hiatt. Okay, and some housekeeping notes before we get started. As this is a community Zoom meeting and not a webinar, please keep your mic muted while the presentation is happening. Once the Q&A section begins, please enter your questions into the chat or virtually raise your hand, only unmuting when asking a question, and Kevin will be sure to try to get to your questions. Additionally, this meeting has live captioning, which you can enable by pushing the show captions button on the bottom menu. And finally, you should have been notified that this virtual meeting is being recorded. We will make the recording available, hopefully within a week, and announce this via social media and on the Arches community forum. Okay, and with that, I'd like to hand over the meeting to Kansa, who will be presenting on the latest release. Eric?
Thanks so much, Annabel. As Annabel indicated, my name is Kansa, and I work in support of the Arches project as a consultant to the DCI, and I'm going to do a brief overview of the Arches version 7.6 release. But first I'll do a little bit of an introduction about what the release cycle is like and what long-term support means and what it means for you for making decisions about how you choose to implement Arches. And then after we go through some of that and some of the specifics of the 7.6 release, we'll turn it over for discussion. So hopefully, if you have questions and things like that, we're fortunate to have the experts here, Cyrus, especially with Farallon Geographics, who led a lot of the development work around this. So we'll have hopefully a good chance to get into some of the specifics. So without further ado, I just want to remind everybody about the Arches release cycle. So you're probably familiar with sort of the major, minor, and patch releases, but just to remind everybody, there are different kinds of levels of sort of the sort of scope and significance of changes when software gets released, including the Arches software. So major releases is when there's really significant architectural changes to the software, and those changes can involve some really significant updates in how Arches functions both internally and how Arches connects with other systems and other software that you may be using in conjunction with Arches. So major releases are really signposts for indicating really big, significant changes. Arches 7.6 is a minor release, incrementing up from 7.5. And a minor release has some significant enhancements and new features, but these are mainly additions, basically. They should not break expected behaviors or connections with other software. And last, we have patch releases. And patch releases are really there to fix bugs that get discovered or security vulnerabilities. And Arch's 7.6 already has had a patch release. So it was initially released as 7.6.0, and it is now at 7.6.1. So it's already had a patch release since when it first came out in late September. So basically, I just want to remind everybody that this is the overall framework about how the Arch's release cycle actually works. And you can sort of, when you see those numbers after the version numbers in Arch's, they mean something. And this helps you understand exactly what's going on about the level of significance of these changes with the code. So a few things about why the release cycle works like this, and also just to start providing some framing about what long-term support means. So when developing open source software, we have to remember that we're working in a really dynamic environment, right? So technology changes all the time. So the software, operating systems, hardware, the kinds of things that you would want to connect Arches with, all of that is in constant flux and constant development. And in addition, our understanding of user needs, your own organization needs, that also is also in constant flux. And so there's always a need for new features and new kinds of capabilities to respond to new needs or to respond to existing needs better as we learn more about how to respond to people's needs. In addition to all this, there's a complex ecosystem, as I mentioned, about things like operating systems and also all the components that go into Arches, and then also Arches itself. Each one of these components may have bugs or issues that get discovered over time, and we need to fix those things. So that has to be part of the software release process and the software development process. In addition to bugs, security vulnerabilities are also an important part of the landscape. Security vulnerabilities get discovered all the time, and they need to be addressed in order to make sure that the data isn't compromised and people can use the software to achieve their organization's goals. And then finally, factoring in, all of these issues of constant change and flux, and the fact that software needs to be constantly maintained and updated, that presents a really important set of challenges to organizations, especially if they need to manage and plan with scarce resources. And most organizations within the cultural heritage space have pretty severe resource constraints. And so planning becomes a really important kind of an issue when you're thinking about implementing software, including open source software. So we need to factor the life cycle of software and software development into the planning, into your organizational planning, because you need to assign resources to help keep your implementation up to date and well maintained. So this is where long-term support factors in, because long-term support, that LTS that you see at the end of the version number for Arches 7.6, LTS is really a signpost there to help indicate that you've got some guarantees with the 7.6 release that this particular release of Arches will be maintained for a longer period of time than other releases of Arches. And you see on this chart basically a sort of a schedule, a calendar of when different releases of Arches have come out and are planned in the future, and how long the support for these different versions of Arches are going to be continued. And you can see with the 7.6 release, just came out at the end of September this year. And then we expect to continue support for 7.6 until the end of December in 2026. That's for the main support. And then it'll see continued patches for things like security vulnerabilities and bug fixes that may threaten data integrity all the way into June, the middle of 2027. So you can see that when you look at a chart like this, this helps with your resource planning. This helps with you to identify a release that you might want to focus on if you want to implement Arches, because you can understand how long that specific version of Arches will see support, so that you can keep it maintained over a longer period of time, and that maintenance period should be relatively simple to keep up to date. Just if you want to have like a good definition of long-term support, you could always turn to the trustee Wikipedia. This is just their definition for it. But again, it really is important for you to think about in terms of resource planning for your organization when implementing Arches. Not everybody needs a long-term support version, but you need to sort of be aware of it in order to think about resource planning and think about your own needs with adopting Arches. So it is sometimes less important if you are really wanting to be at kind of the bleeding edge where you're really interested in taking advantages of the latest feature development. And long-term support is not necessarily going to have all of these new features added to it, because mainly it's there to provide a solid foundation and something that's reliable for a longer period of time, but it's not going to have the new things added to it over and over again, as would be happening with other releases of Arches. So if you're really needing to keep pace with feature development, then you may not choose to stick with a long-term support release. Also, if you have the capacity within your organization to make major changes, between major and minor versions, because some of those upgrade processes may have a little bit of complexity to them and would require some systems administration or developer time. If you have the capability, then the long-term support might be something that is also less interest for you. And then finally, if you don't need to keep your Arches instance for too long, then long-term maintenance is less of an issue for you, and then you don't necessarily need to factor the long-term support release into your thinking, because you expect to sunset your Arches implementation relatively quickly. So those are sort of circumstances where LTS is less important. And on the flip side, you can see when LTS is more important is when you actually need some bedrock of stability, basically, where you have stakeholders or other information systems that need to connect, and they have a sort of expectation for a certain level of stability and consistency, and you don't need or want to make more fundamental changes over the lifetime of your implementation. And this is also important when you have more resource constraints and when it is harder to make more significant and complex upgrades. So we can talk about this more as we continue after the discussion of the specific features of Arches 7.6. But I just want to highlight the importance of this sort of signpost of what LTS means and how that's so significant when you're thinking about implementing Arches within an organization. Okay, so now I'm going to just go through some of the features of Arches 7.6, and we'll start out with a very high-level overview. And in Arches 7.6, there are bug fixes that have fixed some issues in earlier version of Arches. Most of these are going to be more fully documented in the release notes. So if you go to the GitHub repository for Arches and you take a look at the release notes, then you can see an extensive list of things that have been patched and updated and fixed. One of the most important new architectural and feature changes in Arches version 7.6 is a new permissions framework. And this permissions framework offers a great deal more flexibility and capabilities for sort of setting your permissions and access permissions for arches in ways that really align to very different kinds of security kinds of needs. And I'll get into that more in a moment, but this is actually one of the more significant changes in the 7.6 release. There are also several more enhancements to arches that are really focused on improving the reliability and the ease by which developers can make customizations of arches. And this includes reducing some of the complexity of making those customizations, and some internal changes to arches, especially with search, to make search more modular and easier to customize. So essentially, a lot of the sort of changes in the 7.6 release are really there to reduce the cost and complexity of customizing arches. And then finally, there are several different features and performance improvements that I'll explore in the subsequent slides. So this is really just the overview of what the 7.6 release contains, and then I'll get into a few more details. So the permissions framework, and if anybody sees that there's like a poster of Mordor behind me, you'll know I'm a Lord of the Rings geek. The permissions framework in Arches is now has a significant improvement, and there's a couple aspects of this improvement that you should know. So Arches has had a long supported, very flexible kinds of permissions management, and this allows implementers and administrators to customize who has access to what, who can change what sorts of resources. But the overall paradigm of the legacy permission systems of Arches was essentially default allow. In the sense, essentially was that by default, users had kind of implicit access to see things, and then you configured Arches to sort of stop access to certain kinds of resources that you didn't want users to have access to. Maybe they were sensitive. The new option in the permissions framework is called default deny, and it basically flips that on its head. And default deny basically implicitly stops access to stops permissions for accessing resources until they're explicitly granted. And what's important about that is that it aligns with certain kinds of IT security kinds of paradigms. And one of that key paradigm there is the principle of least privilege. And what that is essentially there to do is, in case you're managing sensitive information, especially if most of your information is mainly sensitive, you want to have reduce the risks of accidental exposure to that information. And what default deny does is, by default, it says that, okay, nobody has access to this stuff except for super users of the site. And then you gradually turn on access to things that you want to grant access to, but you have to do that very deliberatively. And that, because it's a deliberate decision, then you have better protections for those sensitive resources. You're less likely to accidentally release something that shouldn't be released. So this is something that's really important, really depending on the sort of security and risk stance that you're navigating with your Arches implementation. If you're managing sensitive information, default deny can be a really important kind of tool to help reduce risk of accidental disclosure. One of the other things about this is that this new permissions framework, because it's now much more modular and customizable, you can also develop completely alternative permissions frameworks with a developer team that you can just sort of plug into Arches and configure with your own implementation. And then the configuration itself is quite simple. It's basically a little bit of Python that you edit in the settings.py to activate, to switch between the default of default allow to default deny. And when you make those kinds of changes, you'll have to re-index your database. All of this is now in the documentation. So if you go take a look at that link, and we can sort of share that link in the chat, there's a larger discussion there of how the default allow and the default deny permission systems actually work, what the behaviors are, and gives you some explicit instructions on how to make changes to them. So essentially, that's one of the really important new developments in the 7.6 release. Okay, so I'm not going to get into too much detail about this. If you are a developer, though, I encourage you to save some of your questions for Cyrus when we get to the Q&A part of the conversation today. But really, again, a lot of the enhancements of 7.6 are to reduce the cost and complexity of making customizations, and because the complexity is also reduced, that helps improve security. There's a lot more embracement of Vue.js, and that's going to be there to help improve the maintainability of custom front-end code that you may develop for Arches. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of modularity now. The search functions of Arches are less monolithic, they're much more modular. And because they're much more modular, then you can tap into different parts of the search functionality of Arches in order to make customizations of those too. So essentially, all of these things are there to provide sort of a set of building blocks and tools for developers to make it easier to do the customizations and make your own enhancements with Arches. Okay, a few other things to look at. There's some features to think about. There is now a capability to upload shapefiles directly into the map editor. And so this is important because lots of information that is managed in the cultural heritage sector and beyond is going to be managed in tools like Esri ArcGIS, and their native format is the shapefile. And this is just one of these ways in which Arches is playing nicely with that ecosystem software that's out there. There's also a new data type for storing non-translatable strings that's especially important for things like identifiers, zip codes, DOIs, all sorts of other kinds of identifiers where you don't necessarily need to have multilinguality associated with them. Also part of the Vue.js, there's a lot more support for internationalization. And there's been some enhancements to search, especially with sizes, geometries that get indexed. And this is a nice little example of one of those enhancements also to search. One cool new feature in the 7.6 release is to be able to use the geometries that are associated with the resource instance as a filter in the search interface, in a map-based search interface. And so you could sort of see like one of these little options when you click on this geometry that you can sort of filter by that map feature and use that as a criteria to make a more specific search. A few other things to think about too. So back again to search. There's been some significant speed improvements. I think Cyrus can give you some details of that, but I've heard, depending on configurations and lots of specifics, mileage always varies when you talk about performance improvements, but sometimes maybe 10 times faster, depending on lots of things. But that's because there's a lot more efficiency in the way geometries are being fetched when they're delivered to the map front end. And there's also a big enhancement to search where there's a lot more precision that can be done when you're doing text searches, so that you can select specific nodes for those text searches, and that enhances a lot of the precision there. And last thing that related to search here is also just the ability to export search results in more richly described search results. If you want to export them in CSV or something else like that, you can include a lot more of the attributes associated with the resources that you're exporting with a search result. And then not related to search, but related to the screenshot is there's been some enhancements to the bulk data manager. The bulk data manager is now accepting also the JSON LD format, which is a linked data format that's very popular, allowing you to import JSON LD formatted text data. And also related to the bulk data manager are some important kinds of updates that allow you to make changes to vocabularies. And so you can work with the bulk data manager to update concepts, and that effectively helps you to manage a lot of the data in the RDM, the resource data manager. So the reference data manager, sorry. So these are some important kinds of enhancements that are available there. So with that, I'm going to shift gears now and open the floor to discussion and questions, and hopefully there'll be some people with their hands up and everything like that, and we can hopefully try to address some of the questions they might have. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, and as Eric mentioned, this is now time for the discussion Q&A. If you have questions, definitely drop them in, but I'm going to hand this over now to the moderator, Kevin Kochanski, and also make sure that Cyrus is here. All right, great. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Annabel. Thanks, Eric. I will keep an eye on Q&A for the in the Zoom chat, and you can also raise your hand in the Zoom if you have any questions or any other conversation topics to continue discussing. One thing that might be of interest, since we talked about the the move to the default deny permissions, can you talk a little bit more about the overall Arch's stance of moving towards the principle of least privilege?
Cyrus, want to take that?
Sure. Well, so initially when we introduced resource instance permissions, the use case that we really had in mind is that someone would have an Arch's implementation, and there might be some resources that were more sensitive, and they would want to restrict permissions or access to those resources for particular users and groups. But it turned out that a lot of Arch's instances actually require most resources to be restricted in some way or other. And currently we're using a technology called Django Guardian, and this creates a one or more database records for every instance that needs to be restricted. So if you have a large number of resources that need to be restricted, then the number of records to protect those instances grows very, very quickly. And also, there was another issue in which if you added a new user then to your system, and you had a lot of resources with complex resource instance permissions, then you would have to very quickly apply those restrictions to that new user. So default deny allows you to restrict an instance automatically. So you add a new user and they don't have any access to any resources unless they belong to a group that has access to those resources. So it's more secure in that sense that you wouldn't accidentally expose a resource, because by default, everything is denied permission. It also allows you to store permissions on many more resources, because we don't have to add permissions records for every single resource that you want to deny access to. So we still by default use default allow. So if you're happy with the current permissions implementation, then you don't have to change anything. But if default deny. If you have a lot of resources and you want to restrict access, then default deny would probably be a better choice. Now, I should mention that the instructions for migrating from one to the other do not change your current permission. So if you have a lot of permission records, we don't modify those. You still have to probably recreate your permissions once you move to default deny if you have permission restrictions in place. So, but for the most part, the transition is pretty easy. All you have to do is change your settings and then re-index your database. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Cyrus. I don't see any other questions, so maybe a general question about looking to the future of arches and some of the forthcoming development. What are some skills or competencies that you would recommend a developer team would have as they customize or upgrade arches?
Well, definitely Vue. A lot of the changes in 7.6 are actually geared toward us migrating to transitioning from Knockout.js to Vue. So one of the changes in 7.6 allows you to write a plugin completely in Vue and then even give it a subdomain so that you can design a plugin that doesn't have any of the knockout Chrome. And there are some other changes underneath the hood to, we upgraded the version of Vue that we're using. We're using Prime View for our components for the UI. So I think that if someone's interested in developing for arches, then Vue is probably the top priority.
Cyrus, as an engineer, is adopting Vue kind of just growing an existing competency, or is that like a whole nother language?
I would say that you mean in the developer world in general, like the web development world? It's a web framework that shows a lot of promise. It's very popular. Not as widely used maybe as React.js, but still it has a very strong developer community. We chose it because it is very performant, and that's something that we want to improve in Arches going forward, is in improving the performance of the UI. It also had support for internationalization, which is something that we've added in 7.6, support for internationalization in Vue. And I think that if a developer is familiar with React.js, which is probably the most widely used framework, then they'll find themselves very comfortable with Vue. The documentation is really, really good. And there are a lot of tutorials out there. So I think that JavaScript developers will feel very comfortable with this framework.
Thanks.
Vue is pretty low barrier to entry too. So that's I think that's the other thing. You can get yourself up to speed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We do have a question from the attendees. So has the 1500 coordinate set limit for geometries been removed, or is the limit just increased?
It's been removed. It's been removed. Actually, it's not us that we didn't remove it. We didn't implement it in the first. It's actually imposed by Lucene, which is a technology that Elasticsearch uses, and that restriction was the length of a string that can be stored in search. And so we kept bumping up to that limit. And so what we do now is if we get a really large geometry, we break it into pieces. This was a contribution made by Brett Ferguson, by the way. So we're very grateful to his contribution. So we chunk it into pieces, and then we add it into the document that gets stored in search, so that we don't have to store one big string. It's just broken down into lots of little strings. So I haven't hit a limit with it, so I think it's gone.
I think it might be useful, Eric. You showed us a schedule of the releases and how long they'd be supported, but maybe you could go back and just underline when the next LTS release would be out and how long support would remain for the new 7.6 LTS release.
Sure, let me pull up that slide. Okay. Yeah. So just to show that on the Arches project website, there are you can take a look a little bit more about some of the roadmap that is planned and some of the schedule information that you can access there too. But,
thanks, Eric. I will drop a link to the direct link to the roadmap in chat just in case folks are interested.
So I'll just say about this that each feature release is our cadence is every nine months. So I mean you can see that here, but just and then for between LTSs it would be about 2 years and 9 months between LTS releases.
And go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say patch releases. Patch releases come out as we fix bugs. So if it's a really serious bug, we will get that patch release out right away. But otherwise, we might collect a few bug fixes over the course of a month or 2 months, and then do a patch release. But yeah, if it's anything that is of high priority, then we'll turn up a patch release around right away. So patch releases aren't scheduled; they just are made available as needed.
Thanks. And Cyrus, there's a follow-up to the question about the geometries. As the string is broken up, will this be visible on the map in sections, or will the geometry as a whole be shown?
The geometry as a whole will be shown. We will not. Yeah. It behind within Elasticsearch, it will be a single polygon. If it's broken up, will be a mosaic of geometries. But when you do a search on, with a filter, then it won't matter. It'll still intersect with the composite geometry. But what we display on the map will be the original intact geometry.
Are there plans of integrating the Docker implementation in the upcoming versions?
That's a good question. The issue I would say around that is that different organizations have different needs with Docker and different implementations. So we have not settled on a particular approach to using Docker. So we have had discussions about getting a kind of a Docker working group together to kind of move forward on a single container solution, but we aren't there yet.
All right. Let me while we wait to see if anybody else. Oh, here we go. Are there plans to use the non-localizing string data type in places in the system settings? Some nodes, such as Mapbox API key, wouldn't need the internationalization.
Right. Yes. So the system settings, I would say, need some attention. That resource model hasn't been updated in several years. So I think that would be a nice change to make that. And some settings I don't know if we need on that model anymore. And there are other things that would be pretty nice to have, such as the system analysis, coordinate system, and that kind of thing that an admin might want to change very easily. So yeah, I think that would be one of several changes that we would like to make to the system settings graph.
Thank you. And Eric Mamoto asked the question, just wanted to say the Docker implementation that you built is great. And thank you again. So want to make sure you saw it.
That's very, very kind of mood. Thank you. Just about that, I have gotten on the local branch of that Arches via Docker repo. The local branch does deploy Arches version 7.6.1. I'm still working on the main branch so that you could deploy it in conjunction with Nginx and all the Let's Encrypt to have a SSL certificate so you can put it up on the web on a more public site. But I'm still working on that side. But if you want to play with it on a local host, you can do that right now with the local branch of that Arches via Docker.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still open for questions, but Annabel, it looks like you had a poll about plans to implement Arches 7.6. So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll, and you'll see what the question is here. Are you planning on upgrading to or implementing Arches version 7.6 LTS? If you could answer that, that would be great, so that could give us more information. Okay, let's wait a little bit longer so that everyone can answer it. Or at least a good majority. We're at 40% now. Yeah, 50%.
If only we get the results this quickly in November.
Oh, if only for those of us in the US. Okay. Great. 70%. All right. Okay. So I'm going to close the poll. We've got 75% of people have answered. Go ahead and end that. And go ahead and share it with everybody. So yeah, no, that's some interesting information. Looks like there's a good percentage of people that are already in the process of implementing the release, which came out in late September. Some people need more information. No one's waiting for version 8. Cool. and a few people already have. That's really good information. So yeah.
I was just going to say, those of you who need more information, I hope you know where to find it, and you can ask any questions while we're here right now. You can reach out to us, contact at archesproject.org, and certainly explore our website. Well, either Eric or Cyrus was about to say something, and I interrupted you.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to make a pitch for 7.6 to those who need more info. And Eric mentioned this, but I'll just point out again that the map in 7.5 up to 7.5, we were using an older function in Postgres to create the tiles that get loaded into the map page, and we updated that in 7.6. So so if you had a really large number of resources on your map, the performance wasn't very good, and sometimes would bog down the database if someone or multiple users were panning very quickly on the map. And now in 7.6, it can handle an enormous number of geometries. It's very performant. We have one instance that has hundreds of thousands of geometries on the map, and it handles it with ease. So if you have a lot of geometries, then 7.6 is really a good version to move to.
All right. Well, thank you, Cyrus. Are there any other questions from the group? If not, I will pass it back to Annabel.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Feel free to break through with a question while I'm wrapping up, though. What I will say, though, is that Yeah, thank you for attending this community call. Again, we have these community calls for our community, for you all. And I'm glad that you're all taking advantage of having the chance to listen to the presentation and learn more about version 7.6, the LTS version. And yes, and also asking questions. So I wanted to thank Eric, Kevin, and Cyrus for their time, as well as you all who have attended. And like I previously mentioned, we will be putting out a recording of this meeting within a week on our website, archesproject.org, and our YouTube channel. And we'll also let you know about that via our social media. Also, just to let you know, if you are not already signed up for our announcement list, please go ahead and do that. We have a bulletin coming up in the next month. And for those of you who get that, you all know that that's always chock full of information. And anyway, thank you again. And we all hope to see you at a future community call or on the forum. And yes, have a great day.
Thank you all.